Hi, and welcome to the Azure Innovation Podcast. I'm your host, Ross Kennedy. Thank you for joining us in this podcast series where we speak to cloud-first companies, technology leaders, and venture capitalists on all things innovation. With the latest generative AI wave, we are seeing startups and cloud-first companies leading the charge in innovation. These companies are building solutions that enhance customer experiences and drive operational excellence across a wide range of verticals. Healthcare in particular is an industry that is well suited for AI innovation. With large amount of data, complex processes, strict security, and confidentiality requirements, AI can make a big impact in healthcare. With us today is one such company driving innovation in healthcare, Pangaea Data. I'd like to welcome my friend, Vibhor Gupta.
Thank you, Ross. It's a pleasure to meet you, and thank you to Microsoft for this opportunity to share our story.
I'm grateful for it. Well, why don't we get jumped right in? Maybe you can tell me, what does Pangaea do and what is your mission?
So Pangaea is a company built by scientists, engineers, and clinicians between London and South San Francisco. And we provide a software product platform to physicians in healthcare and to study teams in the pharmaceutical industry to help find more untreated patients, meaning those patients who are undiagnosed, misdiagnosed, or miscoded across hard-to-diagnose conditions. And these patients comprise up to 90% of the patient population across these 7,000 hard-to-diagnose conditions. And we're helping solve that problem by finding them and then bringing them into screening, both from a pre-diagnosis perspective and also from the perspective of post-diagnosis at the point of care.
That's incredible. So not only is it, a problem at scale, but is a problem of importance, which is really, you're literally at the intersection of importance. Can you share some specific examples of how your AI technology has driven measurable impact in both business and societal contexts?
Absolutely. So just to share two specific examples, one is with one of the largest public health systems in Europe, where our product was deployed by physicians to find more untreated patients for cachexia, which is a form of muscle loss, impacts more than 80% of the cancer patients and leads to 20% of casualties, but is terribly underdiagnosed in more than 50% of the patients. And here, working with this public health system, we were able to find 6 times more such untreated patients for cancer cachexia compared to if we would have been looking for these patients based on metadata searches or based on just looking for symptoms through building natural language processing or NLP models. So in this particular study, we processed close to 8,500 patient records from both primary and secondary care behind the firewall of these health systems. And where those traditional NLP approaches or metadata-based searches would have found only 41 patients, we found 294 patients to be precise, all of who were validated through a manual review by physicians. So this study is now being taken further, where both retrospective and prospective data will be processed through Pangaea, so these patients could directly be scheduled in for a clinical review. Through a health economic study, on the back of this work, the physicians reckon that about 200,000 new patients with cancer cachexia could be brought into care annually. And they have shown how they are able to halve the cost of treatment in these patients from about £10,000 to £5,000, which of course means about £1 billion savings for a public health system just for one condition alone. And you can imagine how this could also provide empirical evidence to hire more nutritionists and plan your resources better and optimize your care pathway. So that is one very concrete example. We, of course, have a few more which are sponsored by pharmaceutical companies because you can appreciate, given the statistics where up to 90% of the patients could be untreated or undertreated, what that means is that only 1 out of 10 patients who could benefit from a drug that a pharmaceutical company has on the market are actually, benefiting. So that means, there are 9 out of 10, these 10 patients who are not even getting the drug that they deserve. And not to forget that it also means that 9 out of these 10 patients are missing out on all those trials and those new therapies that could benefit them and provide them care. So the pharmaceutical companies are highly motivated to sponsor this kind of work, and they are doing that. We have one other success story with Microsoft, where one such pharmaceutical company, through the use of Pangaea behind the firewall of these health systems in the US, was able to find 5 to 6 times more patients with COPD and with CKD. And now they're extending the rollout of the Pangaea product across tens of other health systems across the US, Spain, Japan, and China.
That's incredible. COPD is chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, I think?
That is absolutely right. And it's a prevalent, hard-to-diagnose conditions. And this is a very important point, Ross, because hard-to-diagnose conditions can be both prevalent and rare. And every time we talk about untreated patients, automatically we assume that it only applies in the context of rare conditions. But actually, you'll be surprised that in prevalent conditions like COPD, CKD, we still have up to 50%, 90% patients respectively who are untreated or undertreated.
Unbelievable. So what's amazing about this is it's not only saving lives, but it's improving the quality of the lives that exist, and that it's also driving down costs in healthcare, sort of the trifecta of all three. Can you provide some examples of how the AI solutions have empowered traditionally underserved communities or sectors as well?
Absolutely. And just to build on that point, Ross, you're absolutely right. It's helping improve outcomes for those patients, especially when the data is already available and without needing to transact it, thereby being compliant from a privacy regulation standpoint. Underserved communities is a very important subject. We're actually working with the largest academic medical centers in the US, with whom we are also publishing our work, where they have shown how we help them find more lung, breast, and prostate cancer patients who were already diagnosed but were still not being brought in for a tumor genetic test, which is what should have happened, in spite of all their data being there. And this was largely due to their demographics and their social backgrounds, which, as you can get my drift, is a big challenge from a health equity standpoint, especially in the US, which these physicians are very highly motivated to address. So this project is being extended, where our product will be processing thousands of records that this health system manages today, with a view to finding those patients who are simply falling through the net due to being of a certain demographics background or due to being from socially disadvantaged backgrounds, so they could be brought into care and receive the necessary treatments that they deserve.
Yeah, and I like the way you frame that as about health equality. And I think sometimes we underestimate how important that is versus just the outcome, but it's the equality aspect of it as well. Maybe you can briefly describe the technologies that are used in this solution, including the Azure services.
Absolutely. So, of course, like any product, we take great pride in our engineers who are actually leading the charge on making sure the product does what it says on the tin. And to do that, they benchmark a whole lot of components and their capabilities. And what we found is that there were some Microsoft tools and services which really stood head and shoulders above the rest that we had the opportunity to benchmark them against. So these include the likes of Text Analytics for Health, Azure OpenAI, and of course, those combined with the ability now that is being delivered by Microsoft through Fabric and Power BI really enables us to, number one, deliver Pangaea along with its capabilities to find more of these untreated patients, but also deploy this in a smoother manner so that it's a very low lift for those IT teams at these healthcare systems, which is very, very important when you're trying to bring something like this to life.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. It's interesting when you think about healthcare. It's such an incredibly regulated industry. It can tend to be very slow to make change. I wondered, have you had strategies that you've employed to drive AI adoption in these types of organizations, ones that have been sort of historically resistant to technological change?
So that's a great question. You see, if from a physician standpoint, you want to do what's best for the patient. But the reality is you also have very limited time. In fact, you have no time. I'm sure you've heard physicians say that. And if you were to ask them what their number one sort of challenge was, it was limited time. And the last thing they want is another application or product on their dashboard. From an IT team's perspective, in a health system, they have 150 other priorities on a daily basis. So the last thing they want is yet another AI model or AI-driven product or another technological solution which is going to add to their workload. So the question always was, how do you deliver what we are here to deliver through Pangaea in a manner so that it's zero disruption for a physician, so they carry on doing what they're doing in their daily lives and yet benefit from the product's capabilities, and it is zero disruption for the IT teams so they can deploy this without having to do a heavy lift. And what that really translates to is, number one, privacy preservation, so that the data is sacrosanct. You're not asking them to de-identify any data, move any data, build another sandbox or infrastructure where you would do this work. You're just saying we work to your existing infrastructure without ripping or replacing anything. That's number one. Number two, you're trying to do this in a manner so that it's sustainable, meaning it's not like you do something and then to continually use it ongoing for several other conditions or clinical objectives. You have to redo the whole thing as a data science project over the course of 9 to 6 months. And that was very, very important. That means it was very much, the software allowed them to reuse the product easily. And number three is a sustainable business model, meaning that you're not asking the physicians to just, buy a product and pay from their own budget without knowing what the results were going to be. But we had to build a business model which allowed them to try the product, benefit, show impact, both in their work and in the context of improving patient outcomes by finding more of these patients and bringing them into care, and then also showing reusability without the need to transact any data, as I said, or ripping or replacing any of their infrastructure. So having that ability to achieve all those three objectives and baking that into, as we always say, into the process with the help of people and the technology was key to the success that we have been able to demonstrate.
Yeah, so to minimize disruption, make sure it's sustainable and reusable, and then make sure that the business model aligns. You're not asking them to pay up front for unproven results, but you get a chance to use and generate value from this ahead of time. So I wonder, how does Pangaea Data ensure all AI technologies are deployed responsibly, particularly in healthcare where data security, privacy, and compliance are extremely important?
You're absolutely right. Now, you see, in the context of being responsible, the first thing we looked at was, is the technology explainable? Because if it's explainable, it's being responsible in the first instance for the clinicians. Is this going to act like a black box where you do some clever mathematics inside and then you generate an output which the physicians might agree on or might not agree on? And with that in mind, we made sure that our product was configured, for example, based on clinical guidelines that a physician uses in the clinic today. And by doing so, the physicians are able to develop trust with the product because they know on what basis the output is being generated. And that also allows them to explain it to their patients. It allows them to explain it to their leadership when they're justifying the business case for the product. And the IT teams then know how to configure the product further in the context of new clinical objectives. That was point number one, around explainability. And secondly, when we talk about being responsible, it's about making sure that the product is continually configured on the basis of those guidelines rather than being biased, if I may use that phrase, from any underlying data or the propensity or the frequency of any particular type of population that is being represented through that data. And that again comes back to the fundamental principle in medicine that, we want to provide equitable access to healthcare, but also based on a knowledge base that is standard or harmonized across different populations, while keeping in mind the different context in which we have to sort of apply that knowledge.
That's amazing. So explainable, and that the data set is equitable, right? So that it's continually configurable, I think is the word you used for it. Very powerful. And so one of the questions I always love to ask entrepreneurs, especially those that are doing something truly transformative like this is what advice would you give others that are looking to build AI-powered apps and solutions?
Well, if I had to, keep it brief, I would say just focus on customer success. And by that, I mean, know very well, number one, who your end beneficiary is. In our case, it's the patients. We really have to keep them front and center of our initiative to really understand what they go through. Just to give you an anecdotal story, I had somebody recently who approached us saying that their aunt, who's a MD herself, was suffering from migraines for 2 years. And in spite of being a doctor and just treating themselves in the best way possible they could, they were it was not easy for, they could not diagnose that condition properly. Let's put it that way. It wasn't until their niece, who also graduated as a doctor, when they looked at their records and the entire record, that they figured out that it was actually due to temporal arthritis. So you can imagine, and these stories are endless. From the clinic, we know of so many such stories where being untreated or undertreated has a huge impact on patients and their families. So that always keeps us motivated, number one, but it also keeps us inspired about pushing the boundaries through technology, which is the means to this end, to really help those patients as those end beneficiaries. The second, I would say, is be very clear and be very close to your end users, who in our case are those physicians who are treating those patients. The reason I say that is because when we started doing this, everybody said, this is great, we can find more patients. But then the question always was, if the physicians are already short of time, how are they going to treat those patients? How much capacity do they have to build additionally to bring those patients into care? Who's going to help them build those capacities, right? And deal with such a large population of patients who are coming in. And as we worked with those physicians, we figured out they genuinely meant to help these patients, but we were also figured out the processes which would help them address those concerns I've listed. And that became a great feedback loop to not only help transform the care delivery, but also help provide empirical evidence, which was used by these physicians to build business cases, to build capacity and all the other infrastructure that they needed to do to treat these patients. And finally, of course, understand your sponsors. Have a very clear business model. It'll be an iterative process, but just understand who is paying the bill. And in our case, like it's the pharmaceutical companies sometimes it is the healthcare providers, and at other times it is both. It was very important to understand what the business model was going to be, how they were going to pay for this, and on what basis. So with, again, those three factors, keeping those in mind, at all times, and staying very focused on success across those three, hence customer success, is what my advice would be to my peers.
And I'll try to paraphrase that back, and hopefully I've gotten it right. It's, focus on driving meaningful impact, be customer obsessed, and understand who your stakeholders are. Is that roughly?
Yeah, absolutely right. You summarized it right.
It reminds me of an IDC report that I read recently that talks about how venture capital money is now thinking about it. And they are saying those three very things is essentially, they need to be able to have a clear delineation of what the ROI is, and that there is customer obsession by the startup that's focusing on it. I think we're starting getting to that point now where AI has had all of the hype and all of the excitement that's, sort of built up behind it. Now what we're needing to see is, what is the tacit, tangible outcomes that can be derived from this? I wonder, when you think about Pangaea Data, what's next in the journey?
For us, it's about patient engagement. You see, because we always, as you can appreciate, what we're doing right now is finding more untreated and undertreated patients and bringing them into care, which helps both pharmaceutical companies and healthcare systems for the reasons we discussed earlier on this call. But how do we engage patients? I'm sure if I was to just do a show of hands across the listeners right now, to ask how many understand the language spoken by their physician or the reports released to them by their health systems, that population is going to be very small. is because but this is why patients would then consult their friends or people with knowledge about, what's really written in those reports and what the treatments mean for them. And it is that process of engaging patients and making all of this knowledge and activity accessible to them in a layman language, if I may say that, so that they are more inspired and motivated to adhere to it and also be able to engage better. I think that's where we would love to take Pangaea next.
That's exciting. Well, listen, thank you so much for your time today, Vibhor. I am very excited to see where you take Pangaea Data, especially around its impact on driving patient outcomes and quality of life, as well as driving down healthcare costs. I can't wait to see where you take things. We hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you'd like to learn more about Azure services that will help you build generative AI apps, check out our website. Thank you for listening. And again, thank you, Vibhor.
Thank you very much, Ross.